The ballroom lights were too bright, and Aria Calloway felt every camera in the room waiting for her to turn the wrong way. She kept her left side to the wall. She had practiced that careful angle for 3 years, the one that hid the long, thin line running from her collarbone to the edge of her jaw. Tonight, surrounded by investors, board members, and at least 6 photographers from financial magazines, one wrong turn could put her scar on every screen in the country by morning. Her father had insisted she come. Marcus Calloway needed his daughter standing beside him at the Calloway Industries Spring Gala, smiling, proving to the shareholders that the family was solid, even though everyone in that room knew the company was not as solid as it looked. There had been whispers for months about a takeover. Aria did not understand all the financial language, but she understood her father's face when he thought no one was watching him, and that was enough. A waiter passed with a tray of champagne. Aria did not take a glass. Alcohol made her hands shake, and shaking hands drew attention, and attention was the one thing she could not afford tonight. Across the room, a tall man in a perfectly fitted suit watched her with the kind of interest that made her stomach turn. Julian Vance had been watching her like that for months, ever since his father's company began circling Calloway Industries the way a buyer circles a building he already considers his. Julian smiled at her from across the room. She did not smile back. She was counting the minutes until she could leave, when she noticed a man at the piano who was not looking at her like everyone else in the room. Everyone else looked at her sideways, quick glances and quicker looks away, the kind of attention that made her skin feel too tight. The man at the piano looked at her directly, like she was simply a person standing alone at a party, and nothing more than that. His name was Daniel Hartley, and he had no idea who she was. He had been hired to play background music for 3 hours, the kind of job where nobody remembered your face, let alone your name. He had played nearly 40 minutes of soft, forgettable songs when he noticed the woman standing near the far wall, dressed in a long-sleeved gown on a warm spring night, watching the room like she was mapping every exit in it. He finished the song he was playing and stood up before he could talk himself out of it. Aria did not see him approach until he was already in front of her, holding out one hand, asking if she would like to dance. "I don't dance," she said, which was not exactly true. She had not danced since the accident, since the night that left the scar on her neck and took her mother from the passenger seat beside her. "Then this will be a good time to start," Daniel said. She should have said no. She had a script ready for moments like this, a polite refusal she had used 100 times, but there was something in the way he asked, like he genuinely did not care whether she said yes, that made the refusal stick in her throat. She took his hand. The room did not stop watching her. If anything, more eyes turned toward the dance floor the moment she stepped onto it, because Aria Calloway never danced in public, not since the funeral, not since the headlines that called her a recluse and worse. But for the first time in 3 years, she found she did not care who was looking. Daniel was not a great dancer, and he knew it. He led with more confidence than skill, the kind of dancing that came from a man who had learned just enough steps to get through a friend's wedding. Aria almost laughed at his second misstep, an actual sound she had not made in public in longer than she could remember. "You're terrible at this," she said. "I know," Daniel said, "but you're smiling, so I'm calling it a win." She had not realized she was smiling until he said it. For 3 minutes, Aria Calloway forgot about the photographers, forgot about the board members watching her like she was a stock price about to drop, forgot about Julian Vance's eyes following her across the room, forgot about the scar she had spent 3 years hiding under long sleeves and careful angles. For 3 minutes, she was just a woman dancing with a stranger who had no idea her last name meant anything at all. Then the song ended. Daniel stepped back, still holding her hand, waiting to see if she would pull away. She did not. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I mean that. I'll never forget you." The words came out heavier than she meant them to, and for a moment, the noise of the ballroom seemed to fall away completely, like the whole room had leaned in to hear what she said, and then gone quiet around it. Daniel opened his mouth to ask her name, but she was already letting go of his hand, already turning, already walking toward the hallway that led away from the ballroom and into the private corridors of the hotel, the ones reserved for family. He watched her disappear through a door marked staff only, the kind of door that ordinary guests were not allowed to use. A hand landed on his shoulder before he could follow her. "You don't want to do that," said a broad-shouldered man in a dark suit, his voice low enough that only Daniel could hear it. His name tag read security, and his grip said he meant exactly what he said. "Do what?" Daniel asked. "Chase Miss Calloway," the guard said. "Trust me, it's not worth what it'll cost you." Daniel felt the name land somewhere behind his ribs. Calloway, the same name printed across the banner above the stage, the same name on every champagne glass and folded napkin in the building. The woman he had just danced with was not just a guest at the gala. She was the reason the gala existed at all. He looked back toward the hallway where she had disappeared, the door already closed, the moment already gone. He did not know her first name. He did not know why a single dance had made her say something that sounded less like a thank you and more like a goodbye. Behind him, near the stage, Marcus Calloway was watching the empty space where his daughter had been standing only a moment ago, his jaw tight, his eyes searching the crowd. Julian Vance leaned toward him and said something Daniel could not hear, something that made Marcus's shoulders drop half an inch, like a man agreeing to a deal he did not want to make. The guard steered Daniel back toward the piano, back toward the safe, forgettable music he was hired to play. But Daniel kept glancing at the hallway door for the rest of the night, half expecting it to open again. It did not. Back at the piano, a stagehand named Owen Pierce leaned against the wall beside him, grinning in a way that meant trouble. "You know who that was, right?" Owen whispered. "I know now," Daniel said. "She hasn't danced at one of these things since her mother died," Owen said. 3 years. I've worked 6 of these galas, and she usually leaves before the first course is even served. You got her on the floor for an entire song. People are going to talk about that." Daniel did not want people talking about it. He wanted to understand what had just happened, why a woman who looked like she had been holding her breath for years had let it out, just for a moment, on a crowded dance floor in front of him. Near the stage, Marcus Calloway was still deep in conversation with Julian Vance, and whatever Julian was saying did not look like small talk. Marcus kept glancing toward the hallway where his daughter had gone, his expression caught somewhere between worry and something closer to fear. A reporter near the bar leaned toward a colleague and murmured something about the upcoming merger vote, about how the Calloway family could not afford another headline before the board decided which way to lean. Daniel did not understand any of it yet. He only understood that the woman with the careful sleeves and the quiet voice had looked, for one song, like she had escaped something, and he understood that everyone around her, from the security guard to her own father, seemed determined to make sure that escape did not happen twice. By the time the gala ended and the staff began folding tables and stacking chairs, Daniel had convinced himself the entire dance had been nothing more than a strange, beautiful accident, the kind of thing that happens once and never again. He packed up his sheet music. He did not know her first name. He told himself that not knowing was probably for the best. But he knew one thing for certain, as he carried his things out through the staff exit into the cool night air. He was not going to forget her either. He did not forget her. 3 days later, Daniel found himself standing in front of a newsstand on his way to a job he did not need to think about, staring at a magazine cover he had walked past 100 times without noticing. The cover showed Aria Calloway stepping out of a black car, her face turned slightly away from the camera, a headline beneath her, in bold red letters, asking a question no headline should ever be allowed to ask about a person who had lost her mother. The article inside called her a recluse. It called the crash that killed her mother and scarred her own neck, a mystery that had never been fully explained. It hinted, in the careful, cowardly way magazines hint at things they cannot prove, that Aria herself might have been behind the wheel when it happened, and that the official story did not add up. Daniel read the article twice and believed almost none of it. He had spent 3 minutes with that woman, not 3 years, and even in 3 minutes he had learned more about her than any magazine seemed to know. He had seen the way she held her shoulders, the way she counted exits, the way a single dance had cracked something open in her that she clearly worked very hard to keep shut. People who caused accidents did not move through the world like that. People who survived something terrible did. He told himself to leave it alone. He told himself the same thing the next morning and the morning after that, and somewhere around the 4th morning he stopped telling himself anything and simply started looking for a way back into her world. It was Owen who found the opening, 3 weeks after the gala, in the form of a temporary staffing contract for a charity auction being held inside Calloway Industries headquarters itself. The agency needed extra hands for 2 weeks, setting up, breaking down, running errands between departments. It paid less than the gala job and required twice the hours, and Daniel signed the contract before he had finished reading it. You're doing this because of her, Owen said, not really asking. I'm doing this because the agency pays on time, Daniel said. Owen laughed in a way that told Daniel exactly how much he believed that answer. The Callaway Industries building was nothing like the Gala Hotel. There were no chandeliers here, no orchestras, just 40 floors of glass and quiet ambition, the kind of place where everyone walked a little faster than necessary and spoke a little quieter than felt natural. Daniel spent his first week hauling boxes between floors, learning the building's rhythms and hearing things he was not supposed to hear. He heard two executives in an elevator discussing a man named Edmund Vance, Julian's father, and a company called Vance Capital that had been buying up Callaway stock for the better part of a year. He heard a junior analyst complaining that the board vote on the proposed merger was only weeks away, and that half the room seemed ready to fold the moment Edmund Vance applied enough pressure. He heard, more than once, the word stabilize, used in a tone that made it sound like a threat rather than a comfort. What he did not hear, for an entire week, was anything about Aria. He found her on a Tuesday, in a stairwell on the 17th floor, completely by accident. He had taken the stairs because the elevator was full of board members discussing numbers he did not understand, and he wanted 5 minutes where nobody asked him to carry anything. He pushed open the stairwell door on 17 to catch his breath, and found Aria Callaway sitting on the bottom step of the next flight, her shoes off, her bare feet pressed against the cold concrete, looking like she had been crying recently and had decided, somewhere in the last few minutes, to stop. She looked up at him, and for one full second neither of them said anything. "You," she said. "Me," Daniel agreed. "What are you doing here?" Her voice had lost the soft, startled quality it carried at the gala. This voice was sharper, guarded, the voice of someone who had learned that most people who found their way into her orbit wanted something from her name. "Carrying boxes," Daniel said. "Apparently I'm very good at it." "That's not what I asked." "I know." He leaned against the doorframe, careful to keep some distance between them, careful not to make this feel like the kind of moment it was starting to feel like. "I didn't know who you were. At the gala. I want you to know that, because I'm guessing most people who come near you already know exactly who you are, and exactly what they want." Something in her shoulders eased, just slightly, the way a held breath finally lets go. "Most people do know," she said, "and most people do want something." "What do they want?" "Shares, access, a photograph they can sell, a story." She said the last word like it tasted bitter. Everyone wants the story. Nobody actually wants to know what happened. They just want the version that sells the most magazines. Daniel thought about the cover he had read 3 weeks earlier, the careful hinting. The question mark doing work a sentence was too cowardly to do. He did not mention it. He had a feeling she already knew exactly which headline he meant. "I don't want the story," he said. "I didn't even know there was one until after I danced with you." Aria studied him for a long moment, the kind of look that felt like being weighed on a scale she had built herself, calibrated by 3 years of people failing to pass the test. "Why are you here then? Really?" He could have lied. He thought about lying, about saying something easy and forgettable, the kind of answer that would let them both walk away from this stairwell and never think about it again. Instead, he told her the truth, because it was the only thing he had that felt worth offering her. "Because you said you'd never forget me, and then you disappeared before I could say it back." The stairwell went very quiet. "You shouldn't say things like that to me," Aria said, but she did not say it like a warning. She said it like a confession. "Why not?" "Because I meant it," she said, "and I don't usually mean things like that." Before Daniel could answer, a door opened 2 floors up, and quick footsteps started down the stairs. Aria was on her feet and back into her shoes in seconds, her face already rearranging itself into the careful, controlled expression Daniel had seen across the ballroom 3 weeks earlier, the one that gave nothing away. A woman appeared on the landing above them, dark-haired, sharp-eyed, moving like she had been searching for exactly this stairwell. She stopped when she saw Daniel, her gaze flicking between him and Aria with the speed of someone calculating risk. "Aria," the woman said carefully, "your father is asking for you." "I'm coming, Grace." Grace did not move. She kept her eyes on Daniel a moment longer, the way a guard dog studies a stranger standing too close to the fence. "Who is this?" "Nobody important," Aria said, and Daniel felt the words land somewhere they were not supposed to land, even though he understood, watching her face, that she meant the opposite. Grace did not look convinced, but she nodded toward the door above her, and Arya followed without looking back. The stairwell door closed behind them with a soft final click, and Daniel stood alone on the landing, holding a stack of folders he had completely forgotten he was carrying. He did not see her again for 4 days. On the 5th day, he was wheeling a cart of auction items toward the East Conference Room when Julian Vance stepped directly into his path, close enough that Daniel had to stop the cart or run into him. "You're the piano player," Julian said. It was not a question. "I'm event staff this week," Daniel said. "Funny," Julian said, smiling in a way that did not reach his eyes, "because I could have sworn I saw you dancing with Arya Calloway at the spring gala, and now here you are again, 3 weeks later, inside her father's building, finding your way into stairwells she happens to be sitting in." He let the silence stretch, long enough to make the accusation land without him ever having to say it directly. "That's a lot of coincidence for a man who carries boxes for a living." "I don't know what you're implying," Daniel said. "I'm not implying anything," Julian said. "I'm telling you clearly that Arya Calloway has a great deal riding on the next few weeks, and none of it involves a temporary employee who plays piano on the side. There's a merger vote coming. There are people far more powerful than you who have very specific plans for how this family's future is going to look. You would be doing everyone a favor, including yourself, if you remembered your place." Daniel held his gaze and did not answer. Julian straightened his jacket, satisfied, and walked away without waiting for a response, the kind of man who had never once in his life needed to wait for anything. 2 hours later, Daniel's supervisor pulled him aside near the loading dock, looking apologetic in the careful, practiced way people look when they are following someone else's orders and do not want to admit it. "We're going to have to end your contract early," she said. "Budget changes. I'm sorry." "It's nothing personal." It did not feel like budget changes. It felt exactly like what it was. Daniel packed up the small locker he had been assigned for the week, and as he zipped his bag, he found a folded piece of paper tucked inside one of the pockets, paper that had not been there that morning. He unfolded it slowly. There was no signature, just 6 words, written in careful handwriting that he did not recognize. "Stay away from her, for her sake." He read it 3 times, trying to decide if it was a threat or a warning, and realizing, somewhere around the 3rd reading, that it might be both. Daniel did not stay away. He told himself the note could have come from anyone, a jealous coworker, a paranoid manager, even Grace, who had looked at him in that stairwell like he was a problem waiting to happen. He told himself a lot of things over the following week, and none of them stopped him from sending a single text message to the number Arya had given him on his last day in the building, the number she had pressed into his hand, folded inside a napkin, while Grace was distracted with a phone call. "I got fired," he wrote. "I think someone wanted me gone. Are you okay?" Her reply came 40 minutes later. "I'm okay. Meet me somewhere that isn't owned by my family, please." They met at a small coffee shop 3 blocks from the Calloway building, the kind of place with mismatched chairs and a chalkboard menu, the kind of place nobody would expect to find an heiress on a Tuesday afternoon. Arya wore sunglasses and a baseball cap, and still managed to look like someone trying very hard not to be recognized, which Daniel found, despite everything, a little bit charming. "I got a note too," she said, before he had even sat down. She slid a folded piece of paper across the table. The handwriting was different from the one Daniel had found in his locker, but the message carried the same cold, careful warning. "Distance yourself from distractions. The vote is closer than you think." "Who sent it?" Daniel asked. "I don't know. I have a guess." She wrapped both hands around her coffee cup, not drinking it, just holding it like something to anchor her. "Julian's father owns half the board's loyalty at this point. He's been buying shares quietly for over a year. There's a merger vote coming, and if it goes through the way Edmund Vance wants it to, Vance Capital effectively controls my family's company. And Julian wants to marry you to lock down the shares," Daniel said. It was not a question. He had pieced together enough from overheard elevator conversations to understand the shape of it, even if he did not yet understand all the details. Arya's jaw tightened. "My father hasn't said it outright. Nobody has. But everyone in that building talks about a stabilizing engagement, like it's a business strategy, and not my actual life." She finally took a sip of her coffee, her hands steadier than her voice. "It's almost funny. 3 years ago, the same family circling my company right now was the reason I lost my mother, and nobody seems to remember that part." Daniel went very still. "What do you mean?" For a long moment, Arya said nothing, and Daniel understood, watching her face, that he had just stepped past a line she did not let many people near. The official report says the brakes failed, she said finally. Mechanical failure. Nobody's fault. My mother was in the passenger seat. I was driving. I remember the pedal going soft under my foot. I remember the guardrail coming up faster than it should have. And I remember waking up in a hospital 3 days later with this. She touched the edge of her collar without looking at it. A small, automatic gesture, like checking that a door was still locked. The papers didn't print mechanical failure. The papers printed questions. Was she texting? Was she drunk? Did she do it on purpose? None of it was true, but none of it had to be true. It just had to sell. Who fed them the questions? I don't know for certain, Arya said, but the car's parts came from a supplier that Vance Capital owned a controlling stake in. There was a recall on that exact braking system 8 months after my mother's funeral, quiet, buried in an industry newsletter nobody reads. By then, the story about me was already the only story anyone remembered. Daniel felt something cold settle in his chest, the particular kind of anger that comes from understanding, all at once, that a tragedy someone has carried alone for years might not have been an accident at all. Does your father know this? My father knows the recall happened, Arya said. I don't know what else he knows. We don't talk about it. We don't talk about most things. She looked down at her coffee cup. He didn't defend me after. Not once, not publicly. His lawyers told him it could complicate the insurance case, complicate the company's exposure, and he listened to them, instead of standing next to his own daughter while half the country decided I'd killed my mother on purpose. I've spent 3 years waiting for him to say something. He never has. Daniel reached across the table, not quite touching her hand, leaving the choice to her. She closed the distance herself. I'm going to find out what really happened, Daniel said. All of it, properly, not rumors. That's a dangerous thing to promise, Arya said. I know, Daniel said. I'm promising it anyway. It took Owen exactly 4 days to find what Daniel was looking for, mostly because Owen's cousin worked logistics for a catering company that frequently serviced Vance Capital events, and people who serve drinks at private dinners hear things that never make it into any official record. What Owen brought back was not proof, not the kind that would hold up anywhere official, but it was enough of a thread to start pulling. 8 months before the crash that killed Arya's mother, Vance Capital had quietly acquired a controlling stake in a small auto parts manufacturer that supplied braking components to several luxury vehicle brands, including the one the Callaway family drove. 6 months after the acquisition, internal quality inspections at that manufacturer were reportedly reduced, a cost-cutting measure pushed through by new ownership eager to improve margins ahead of a planned sale. 2 months after that, Arya's mother died in a car with brakes that failed on a clear, dry road with no other vehicles involved. The recall, when it finally came, covered the exact model and year of brake assembly installed in the Callaway family car. It listed no injuries. It listed no fatalities. It listed, in small, careful print, a single line about voluntary corrective action taken out of an abundance of caution, language designed by people whose entire job was making sure nobody connected the dots out loud. This isn't proof of anything criminal, Owen warned, spreading the printouts across his kitchen table. It's circumstantial. A lawyer would tear it apart in about 90 seconds. It's enough to ask questions, Daniel said. Asking questions about Edmund Vance is how people lose their jobs, Owen said. You'd know. You already lost one. Daniel knew that. He kept the printouts anyway, folded into the inside pocket of his jacket, carried like something dangerous and precious in equal measure. 3 days later, Marcus Callaway found him. Daniel was leaving a job interview, one of several he had scheduled since losing the staffing contract, when a black car pulled up beside him on the sidewalk, and the rear window lowered just enough to reveal Marcus Callaway's face, older and more tired than it had looked across the gala ballroom weeks earlier. Get in, Marcus said. It was not a request. Daniel got in. I know who you are, Marcus said, before the door had even fully closed. I know you danced with my daughter. I know you found your way into my building afterward. I know about the stairwell. His eyes were sharp, exhausted, the eyes of a man who had spent 3 years carrying more weight than he knew how to set down. I am going to ask you, one time, as clearly as I can, walk away from her. With respect, Daniel said, that's not really your decision to make. It is when there's a merger vote in 2 weeks that will determine whether this company, the one that employs 11,000 people, survives the year, Marcus said. It is when a single photograph of my daughter with an unknown man could be twisted into exactly the kind of distraction Edmund Vance needs to push the board toward a deal that strips my family out of our own company entirely. You don't understand what you're standing in the middle of. Maybe I understand it better than you think, Daniel said quietly. I know about the brake recall. I know which company owned the supplier. I know the timeline. Marcus went very still. The particular stillness of a man who has just realized a secret he buried 3 years ago has started, somehow, to claw its way back up to the surface. Where did you hear that? Marcus said, his voice low. Does it matter? Is it true? Marcus did not answer for a long moment, staring out the window at the city sliding past, his hands folded so tightly together that his knuckles had gone pale. I found out 4 months after the funeral, he said finally. By then, the lawsuits were already shaping up. My counsel told me that pursuing it publicly, accusing a company that size of negligence without ironclad proof, would open Callaway Industries to countersuits that could have ended the company. I had a choice between protecting my daughter's name and protecting 11,000 jobs. I told myself I could find a quieter way to do both eventually. He closed his eyes briefly. I never did. She thinks you didn't defend her because you didn't believe her. I have never once doubted her, Marcus said. And for the first time his voice cracked, just slightly, just enough to be real. I doubted myself. There's a difference, even if she's never been able to see it. Then tell her that, Daniel said. Not me. Marcus looked at him for a long moment, something shifting behind his exhausted eyes, something that might have been the beginning of shame, or the beginning of resolve, or both at once. There is going to be an announcement at the next shareholder gala, Marcus said finally, his voice flat again. Business again. The moment of honesty folding itself back into something safer. The board wants stability before the merger vote. Julian Vance has proposed an engagement to Aria as a gesture of unity between the families. I have not agreed to it, but I am running out of room to refuse it. And Aria? Does she know? Not yet, Marcus said. I would prefer to be the one who tells her. The car pulled to the curb. Marcus did not need to say anything else. Daniel understood, getting out, that the conversation had been a warning and a confession at the same time, and that somewhere underneath all of it, Marcus Callaway was a man drowning in a decision he did not know how to undo. Aria found out 3 days later, not from her father, but from Grace, who had overheard 2 board members discussing seating arrangements for the gala in a way that made the announcement impossible to mistake for anything else. She confronted her father in his office that evening, the door closed, her voice low enough that the assistants outside could not make out words, only tone, and the tone alone was enough to make 2 of them find urgent reasons to be elsewhere. You were going to let me hear about my own engagement from a seating chart, Aria said. I haven't agreed to anything, Marcus said. But you haven't said no, Aria said. In 3 years, you have never once said no to anything that protects this company over me. Why would now be different? Marcus did not have an answer ready, and the silence that followed told her everything his words had not. I know about the recall, Aria said quietly. Daniel told me what he found. The brakes, the supplier, the timeline. You knew, and you said nothing. Not to me, not to anyone, for 3 years. I was trying to protect the company, Marcus said. You were trying to protect yourself, Aria said. There's a difference, and you've never once been able to see it. She left his office without waiting for a response. The same words he had used to defend himself turned back against him, sharp enough to draw blood without raising her voice even once. The gala was 11 days away. The announcement, whether her father wanted it or not, was already moving forward, set into motion by people with far more power than either of them, and Aria understood, walking out of that building into the cold evening air, that whatever happened next would not wait for her to be ready. 11 days felt like nothing and everything at once. Daniel spent the first 3 of them sitting at Owen's kitchen table, with printouts spread between them like pieces of a puzzle that refused to form a complete picture. The recall documents proved negligence maybe, if a generous lawyer squinted hard enough. They did not prove intent. They did not prove that anyone at Vance Capital had known about the danger and chosen profit over safety anyway. And without that proof, the whole thread was just a tragic coincidence dressed up as a conspiracy. We need someone who was actually there, Owen said, rubbing his eyes after another late night that had produced nothing new. Someone who worked at that supplier when the inspections got cut. A name, a person willing to say it out loud. Grace found that person, though none of them expected her to be the one who did it. She showed up at Daniel's apartment unannounced on the fourth evening, still in her work clothes, looking like a woman who had spent the entire day deciding whether to be brave or careful, and had finally, reluctantly, chosen brave. "Arya doesn't know I'm here," Grace said, stepping inside without waiting to be invited. "I've worked for this family for 6 years. I watched what those headlines did to her after the crash. I am done watching people decide what's best for her, without asking what she actually wants." She set a folder down on the counter, her hand resting on top of it for a moment, before she finally slid it across. "My uncle worked quality control at that supplier. He was let go 2 months after the new owners cut his department's budget in half. He's been angry about it for 3 years, mostly to anyone who would listen at family dinners. He's never been angry about it to anyone who could actually do something with it." Inside the folder were copies of internal emails, the kind that should never have left a company server, forwarded by a man who had kept them for years out of nothing more than quiet, simmering resentment. The emails were dated 8 months before the crash. They discussed reducing inspection frequency on braking components to meet quarterly cost targets. One email, sent by a director 2 levels below Edmund Vance, explicitly noted the increased failure risk and recommended against the change. The reply, 3 lines long, signed with Edmund Vance's own initials, overruled the recommendation and approved the cuts anyway. Daniel read it twice, the same way he had read the magazine article weeks earlier, except this time there was nothing to disbelieve. "This is real," he said quietly. "It's real," Grace said, "and it's been sitting in a drawer in my uncle's house for 3 years, because he was scared of what a company that size could do to him if he came forward alone." She straightened, some of the fear in her own face hardening into something closer to resolve. "He's willing to talk now, quietly, to the right person, not a reporter who'll twist it for clicks. Someone who actually wants the truth out, not just a headline." "Mr. Whitfield," Daniel said, remembering a name Owen had mentioned once, the board chairman, a man known across the company for his stubborn, old-fashioned insistence on doing things by the book, even when it cost him allies. "He's the only one on that board. Edmund Vance hasn't managed to buy," Grace said. "If anyone can bring this in front of the full board without it getting buried, it's him." It took 2 more days to arrange a meeting, 2 days during which Julian Vance, sensing something shifting in the air around him in the particular way predators sense weather changing, tightened his grip on every part of the situation he could reach. He had Owen's catering contract quietly canceled, costing him 3 weeks of already booked work. He had a junior associate plant a story, with a smaller gossip outlet suggesting Daniel had a history of harassing wealthy women for attention, a story with no evidence behind it that nonetheless made Daniel's name searchable for all the wrong reasons within hours. "He's trying to make you radioactive before the gala," Owen said, scrolling through the article on his phone with a grim expression. "Make sure, if you do show up anywhere near her, it looks exactly like the story he already planted." "Then we move faster than he expects," Daniel said. Mr. Whitfield agreed to meet them in a private dining room 2 floors above the lobby of a hotel that had no connection to either family, the kind of careful neutral ground people choose when they suspect the walls might be listening. He was an older man, silver-haired, with the unhurried manner of someone who had survived 4 decades in corporate boardrooms by never once raising his voice. He read through Grace's folder in complete silence, taking nearly 20 minutes, while Daniel, Owen, and Grace sat across the table and tried not to fill the quiet with nervous talking. "This is serious," Whitfield said finally, closing the folder. "If this is genuine, and I have no immediate reason to doubt it, it changes the entire calculus of the merger vote. A company found to have knowingly suppressed a safety risk that led to a fatality cannot be allowed anywhere near controlling interest in Callaway Industries. The other board members would never approve it, not once this is in front of them, not even the ones currently leaning toward Vance's offer." "Will you bring it to the board?" Daniel asked. "I will bring it to the board the moment I have verified the source is willing to put his name behind it formally, not just in private conversation," Whitfield said. "Allegations without a willing witness are worthless in a room full of lawyers. Your friend's uncle needs to be prepared for what that means. Vance will not go quietly. He will fight this with every resource his family has." Grace's jaw tightened, but she nodded. "He's ready. He's been ready for 3 years. He just needed somewhere safe to put it." Whitfield looked at the three of them for a long moment, something almost like respect moving behind his careful, guarded expression. The shareholder gala is in 6 days. If this is going to matter, it needs to matter before the engagement announcement, not after. Once Edmund Vance has a wedding date locked into the family, the optics become far harder to undo, regardless of what the evidence says. Then we have 6 days, Daniel said. It did not feel like enough. Arya, unaware of any of it, spent those same 6 days trapped in a different kind of countdown, one measured in fittings for a gown she had not chosen, in seating charts that placed her beside Julian Vance at every official function, in careful conversations with her father that circled the same exhausted ground without ever quite landing anywhere new. I am not agreeing to this because I want it, Marcus told her, on the 4th night, sitting across from her at a dinner table neither of them was eating from. I am trying to buy us time. If the engagement is announced, the board sees stability. Stability buys us months to find another way out of this merger before it becomes permanent. You're trading my life for months, Arya said. I am trying to save the company your grandfather built, Marcus said. The company that pays for the hospital that treated you after the crash. The company that employs 11,000 families who have nothing to do with any of this. You said that to me once before, Arya said quietly, about the lawsuit, about staying silent. It cost me 3 years of people believing I killed my own mother. She set down her fork, her appetite long gone. I am not willing to pay that price again, for you or for the company or for anyone. Marcus had no answer for that, not one he was willing to say out loud, and the silence between them stretched long enough that Arya finally stood and left the table, the sound of her chair scraping back the only thing either of them said for the rest of the night. 2 days before the gala, Daniel received a phone call from a number he did not recognize. It was Arya, her voice tight, controlled in the particular way that meant she was holding something dangerous very carefully, so it would not spill. They've moved the announcement up, she said. It's happening at the gala. Father's office confirmed the seating arrangement this afternoon. Julian's already told 2 reporters off the record. By the time I walk into that ballroom, everyone in the building is going to already know what's about to be said. We have something, Daniel told her, and explained, as quickly and clearly as he could, everything Grace's uncle had handed over, everything Whitfield had confirmed, the entire fragile, 6-day case they had built against a man who had spent 3 years controlling exactly what story the world believed about her. Arya was quiet for a long moment after he finished. You found proof, she said finally, her voice unsteady in a way he had not heard from her before, not even in the stairwell. Not even over coffee 3 weeks earlier. Actual proof. That it wasn't me. It was never you, Daniel said. I don't think I needed proof to know that. But yes, now there's proof. Whitfield can bring it to the board, Arya said, thinking out loud, her voice gathering speed and certainty as she spoke. But the board meets after the gala. If the engagement is announced first, in front of every shareholder, every camera, it becomes the story before the truth ever gets the chance to be. Then don't let it become the story first, Daniel said. Get there before Julian does. I'm not the one with a vote on that board, Arya said. I'm the centerpiece of the announcement. I don't exactly get to interrupt my own engagement. You don't need a vote, Daniel said. You need a microphone, and the nerve to use it before he does. There was a long silence on the line, long enough that Daniel wondered if the call had dropped, and then Arya spoke again. And this time her voice had stopped shaking entirely. I have both, she said. The gala was 2 days away. Daniel had no formal invitation, no staffing contract, no official reason to be anywhere near the building. Julian Vance had made certain of that, methodically, over the past 6 days, closing every door Daniel might have used to walk back into that room. He was going to find another way in anyway. Some promises were worth breaking a few rules to keep. The ballroom looked exactly the way it had looked the night Daniel first saw her. The same chandeliers, the same careful arrangement of round tables, the same low hum of important people trying to look unbothered by their own importance. Only this time, Daniel was not standing behind a piano with a contract in his pocket. He was standing near the kitchen entrance in a borrowed staff jacket 2 sizes too large, courtesy of Owen, who had talked his cousin into adding 1 extra name to the catering list, without asking too many questions about why. You've got maybe 20 minutes before someone notices you're not actually carrying any plates, Owen muttered, falling into step beside him with a tray balanced on one hand. "After that, you're on your own." 20 minutes is enough, Daniel said, though he was not entirely sure that was true. Across the room, near the stage, Marcus Calloway stood beside Edmund Vance, the two men exchanging the kind of handshake that photographers loved and neither party meant. Julian hovered close behind his father, already glancing toward the hallway entrance, watching for Arya, the way a man watches for the final piece of a deal he has spent months assembling. Mr. Whitfield sat at a table near the front, the folder Grace had handed over 6 days earlier resting in a leather case beside his chair, his expression unreadable, a man waiting for a moment he had no power to force, only to recognize when it arrived. Arya arrived without sleeves. The room noticed before she had taken 3 full steps into it, a gown the color of deep red wine, sleeveless, cut clean across her shoulders, leaving the scar along her collarbone and jaw completely visible under the chandelier light for the first time in 3 years. Conversations paused mid-sentence. Cameras that had been politely lowered for most of the evening lifted again, all at once, like a single creature turning its head. Arya did not flinch. She did not angle her body toward the wall. She walked directly into the center of the room with her chin level and her eyes steady. And Daniel, watching from the kitchen doorway, understood that whatever she had decided to do tonight, she had already made peace with every camera in the building seeing her do it. Marcus saw her first. Whatever he had planned to say in that moment seemed to leave him entirely, replaced by something that looked, for the first time in years, like simple, undisguised pride. Edmund Vance recovered faster than Marcus did, stepping toward the small stage with the easy confidence of a man who had rehearsed this exact moment a dozen times in front of a mirror. "If I could have everyone's attention," he began, his voice carrying smoothly through the room's sound system. "Tonight marks not just another successful year for Calloway Industries, but the beginning of an even stronger future. It is my honor to announce." "Actually," Arya said, her voice cutting clean through the microphone feedback as she stepped onto the small stage before anyone could stop her, "I'd like to say something first." The room went silent in the particular way that only happens when several hundred people decide, all at once, that they would rather watch than breathe. Edmund Vance's smile did not move, but something behind his eyes went very still. "Miss Calloway, perhaps this isn't the appropriate." "It's exactly the appropriate moment," Arya said, "since I'm the one you're planning to announce." She turned to face the room, and Daniel watched her find the only steady thing in it, the same way she had found him 3 weeks earlier across a crowded dance floor. Their eyes met for half a second, just long enough for her to draw whatever strength she needed from it, and then she turned back to the cameras, to the shareholders, to the room full of people who had spent 3 years deciding who she was without ever once asking her. "3 years ago, my mother died in a car accident that the press blamed on me," Arya said, her voice carrying clean and steady through the microphone, no shake in it at all. "I was driving. The brakes failed. I have lived every day since then carrying both the loss and the suspicion, because nobody, including my own family, was willing to say publicly what actually happened." A murmur moved through the crowd, the sound of several hundred people leaning forward at once. "The braking system in that car came from a supplier in which Vance Capital held a controlling stake," Arya continued. 8 months before the crash, that supplier reduced its quality inspections to cut costs, against the direct recommendation of its own engineering team. I have a copy of the internal communication approving that decision. It is signed by Edmund Vance. Edmund Vance's composure finally cracked, just slightly, a tightening around his jaw that no amount of practiced charm could smooth over. "This is a fabrication," he said, his voice sharper now, less smooth. "A desperate attempt by a troubled young woman to—" "Mr. Whitfield has the original documents," Arya said, cutting through him without raising her voice, "along with a willing witness who worked at that supplier and was let go shortly after objecting to the cuts. I'm sure the board will want to review them very carefully before any vote on a merger with a company that knowingly created the conditions that killed my mother." The silence that followed was the loudest sound Daniel had ever heard in his life. Mr. Whitfield rose slowly from his seat, the leather case in his hand, and the simple, deliberate motion of him standing did more to confirm Arya's words than anything she could have said. "I have reviewed the materials Miss Calloway is referring to," he said, his voice carrying the calm, unhurried authority of a man who had never once needed to raise it to be believed. "I intend to bring them before the full board immediately, ahead of any further discussion of the proposed merger, or any associated personal arrangements. His eyes moved to Edmund Vance, steady and unflinching. I would strongly suggest you have legal counsel present for that conversation. Julian Vance, standing behind his father, had gone the color of old paper. Whatever future he had built in his head over the past several months, the one where he secured both a company and a wife in a single carefully orchestrated evening, was unraveling in real time, in front of every camera that mattered. Marcus Calloway stepped forward then, and Daniel watched the older man do something he had clearly been unable to do for 3 years. He walked directly to his daughter's side, in front of every shareholder, every reporter, every camera that had ever printed a cruel headline about her, and he put his hand on her shoulder, solid and unhidden. My daughter has carried the weight of my silence for 3 years, Marcus said, his voice rough but steady. Finding the microphone, Arya had stepped slightly aside to share. That silence was my failure, not hers. I let lawyers and boardrooms decide what I owed my own child, and I am done letting that happen. She did not cause her mother's death. She survived an act of corporate negligence that someone in this room chose to bury rather than fix. I should have said that publicly 3 years ago. I am saying it now, in front of all of you, because she has waited long enough for someone to say it. The applause that followed started slowly, uncertainly, a few hands at first, and then spread through the room, the way relief spreads through people who have been holding their breath without realizing it. Edmund Vance did not stay for the applause. He left through a side exit with Julian trailing behind him, neither man speaking to the other, both of them moving like men who already understood exactly how the coming weeks were going to unfold. Arya stepped down from the stage afterward, surrounded almost immediately by board members and reporters, all of them suddenly eager for a version of the story they had spent 3 years getting wrong. She answered what questions she could, calm and steady, her father standing beside her the entire time, refusing to let her field a single one of them alone. It took nearly an hour before the crowd around her finally thinned enough for her to slip away, and when she did not go toward the family corridor, the one with the staff-only door she had disappeared through 3 weeks earlier. She went looking for the kitchen. Daniel was still standing near the doorway when she found him, the oversized staff jacket still draped over his shoulders, looking entirely out of place, and not particularly bothered by it. "You came back," Arya said. "I told you I would," Daniel said. "I just had a slightly harder time getting through the front door this time." A small laugh escaped her, surprised, like she had not expected to have anything left in her to laugh with after the last hour. "Thank you," she said, "for the proof, for finding it, for not letting Julian scare you out of the building." "Thank Owen," Daniel said, "and Grace, and her uncle, who apparently held on to 3 years of receipts out of pure spite, which I have decided is one of the most useful character traits a person can have." Arya's smile faded slightly, replaced by something softer, more uncertain. "I meant what I said to you the first night," she said, "about not forgetting you. I want you to know that wasn't just something I said because the moment felt big. I'd been waiting 3 years for someone to look at me the way you did. Like the scar wasn't the most interesting thing in the room." "It isn't," Daniel said. "It never was." The band in the main ballroom had started playing again, slow and unhurried, the kind of song meant for couples who had nowhere else they needed to be. Arya glanced toward the sound, then back at Daniel, something hopeful flickering behind her eyes for the first time all evening. "I believe you owe me a dance," she said, "a proper one this time, where I don't have to disappear afterward." "I'm a terrible dancer," Daniel reminded her. "I know," Arya said. "I'm calling it a win anyway." She led him back into the ballroom, past the lingering shareholders and the slowly dispersing reporters, past her father, who watched them go with an expression that looked, for the first time in years, almost entirely at peace. Nobody stopped them at the door this time. Nobody needed to. They reached the center of the dance floor as the song settled into its slow, easy rhythm, and Arya turned to face him, the scar along her collarbone catching the chandelier light without a single sleeve to hide it, without a single careful angle protecting it from the room. "I'll never forget you," she said again, the same 6 words from 3 weeks earlier, except this time there was no hallway waiting behind her, no staff, only door, no reason at all to disappear the moment she finished saying them. Daniel pulled her closer, slow and certain, and finally gave her the answer he had been carrying since the night they met. "I'll never forget you either," he said, "and this time, I'm not letting you walk away before I get the chance to prove it. The room around them kept turning, full of cameras and shareholders, and the particular kind of noise that came from several hundred people, slowly remembering how to breathe normally again. None of it touched the small, steady space between them on the dance floor, where a woman who had spent 3 years disappearing finally let herself be seen completely, by a man who had never once needed her to be anything other than exactly who she was.